Welcome to this explainer. If you really look around, our modern world is entirely built upon and frankly run by this incredibly powerful, almost invisible entity, the corporation. They shape our daily lives, they manage our infrastructure, and they even run massive chunks of the modern welfare state. But what actually is this giant? And maybe more importantly, how on earth do we hold it accountable? Well, today we are going to demystify the corporate giant by looking strictly at the legal DNA that brings it to life.
Let's dive right in with a truly poetic definition from Chief Justice Marshall. He famously called a corporation an artificial being, invisible, intangible, and existing only in contemplation of law. Just pause and think about that for a second. We aren't talking about a group of people here. We're talking about a superhuman giant created purely by legal fiction. It's literally a tool designed from scratch to handle massive administrative and commercial tasks that no single human being could ever manage on their own. So, to make sense of this rather dense web of administrative law, we're going to break this explainer down into 4 distinct logical chapters. Chapter 1, what is a corporation? 2, rules of corporate liability. 3, controlling the corporate giant. And 4, legal remedies and accountability. Let's get to it.
Part 1, what is a corporation? The invisible giant.
Okay, let's start by defining exactly what this legal entity actually is and how it manages to function completely independently of the flesh and blood humans who run it. The absolute crucial point is captured perfectly right here. A corporation is an artificial legal person, meaning it has its own distinct, entirely separate legal identity. It's not just a collective of its employees or shareholders. Under the eyes of the law, this invisible giant can own its own property, it has its own official signature, called a common seal, and it can enter into binding contracts or sue or be sued completely independently of its members.
Now, one of the most fascinating characteristics here is perpetual succession. Because it's a separate entity, a corporation essentially outlives its creators. It's almost immortal. It's kind of like a legal zombie that simply never dies. If a shareholder leaves or goes insolvent or passes away, the giant just carries on. And this characteristic is incredibly important because it provides the rock-solid stability we need for large-scale economic and public administration. It ensures that massive welfare functions or huge industrial operations don't just collapse overnight when human leadership changes.
And honestly, the absolute perfect illustration of this foundation of corporate law is the historic Solomon versus Solomon & Co. case. This is the landmark moment that officially cemented this rule in the courts. It firmly and finally established that a corporation is legally distinct from its shareholders. You and the company are not the same legal person. Period.
Part 2, rules of corporate liability, making the invisible accountable. All right. Having established its immense, almost immortal power, we absolutely have to explore how the law ensures this artificial giant actually pays for its mistakes. Because these corporations perform vast public and commercial functions. We're talking everything from banking and insurance to critical infrastructure. Modern law holds them strictly accountable. They do not get a free pass. They're liable for contractual breaches and civil wrongs, which are known as tortious acts like negligence. And more importantly, modern administrative law fully recognizes the criminal liability of corporations. If they commit massive economic frauds, regulatory breaches, or environmental crimes, the invisible giant can and will be held legally responsible.
Let's move to a comparison now and see how this builds when we look at the actual intent behind the entity. We have public corporations created specifically by statute for your welfare. Think of the Food Corporation of India or the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation. They combine administrative flexibility with a deep public duty. Then on the flip side, we have private corporations, which are created under general company laws strictly for private commercial objectives. Now this next distinction matters immensely to you as a citizen. The critical difference between public corporations and departmental undertakings. Public corporations, as we've said, are separate legal entities. They can be sued entirely independently for their actions. But departmental undertakings, like the railways or postal services, are completely different. They are directly managed and financed by the government, and their employees are literally government servants. Because of this direct connection, any liability they incur brings up principles of sovereign immunity. That's the historical legal concept that the government, or the sovereign, simply cannot be sued without its own consent. But, the law adapts. The state of Rajasthan versus Vijayawada case is a pivotal moment to remember here. In this specific case, the court officially recognized that the government itself can actually be held liable for negligent acts. It stripped away absolute immunity and ensured that public accountability remains a true cornerstone of administrative law even when the state is the one running the show.
Part 3. Controlling the corporate giant. The democratic guardrails. So now we hit the primary tension of our explainer. How do we stop these massive, heavily funded entities from running amok with your public services and your tax dollars? Well, to keep the giant in check without losing the very administrative flexibility it was created for in the first place, the democratic system relies on an intricate, three-pronged web of control: legislative, governmental, and parliamentary. Working together, they ensure both transparency and efficiency. Let's break down exactly how each one works. First up, we have legislative control. The legislature essentially acts as the creator and the ultimate regulator. Because public corporations derive their existence directly from statutes, the legislature defines their exact powers, functions, and strict limitations right from step one. They hold the purse strings through financial regulations, and hey, if a corporation oversteps, the legislature holds the ultimate trump card in step 3. They can simply amend the statute to restrict powers, or even repeal it to dissolve the corporation entirely. Poof, gone. Second, we have governmental control. While the legislature sets the broad boundaries, the government acts as the hands-on supervisor. They exercise control by directly appointing the managing authorities, meaning the chairpersons and directors who actually run the day-to-day entity. They also steer the macro policy direction by issuing administrative guidelines, and they closely supervise daily expenditures and investments to prevent any misuse of funds.
And this level of governmental control is so significant that it led to a massive landmark ruling, the Ajay Hazia versus Khalad Mujib case. Here, the court determined that when a corporation is heavily controlled by the government, it actually qualifies as the state under Article 12 of the Constitution. That is a huge deal, because it means these corporations are strictly bound by constitutional rules and fundamental rights, exactly like the government itself.
Part 4. Legal remedies and accountability. Reining in the power. Finally, let's explore what happens when these powerful entities actually violate your rights as a citizen or act arbitrarily. What exact legal weapons do you have to fight back? Well, when a public corporation oversteps, the courts are your shield. Through Articles 32 and 226 of the Constitution, courts can issue these incredibly powerful orders known as writs. For instance, if a corporation refuses to do its job, a writ of mandamus legally compels them to act. If they issue a totally illegal order, certiorari can quash it. Other writs can challenge unauthorized offices or protect personal liberty. These are your ultimate legal weapons to ensure the giant is never, ever above the law. But wait, beyond those constitutional writs, aggrieved citizens actually have an entire arsenal of additional remedies. You can demand judicial review, where the courts will vigorously test a corporation's actions for illegality, arbitrariness, or any violations of basic fairness, which is known as natural justice. You can also file direct civil suits seeking financial compensation or injunctions for damages caused, or you can utilize specific statutory tribunals that are designed strictly for appeals. Which brings us directly to the famous R.D. Shetty case. This ruling boldly laid down the standard for all public bodies. The court declared that public authorities must always act with absolute fairness and zero arbitrariness when wielding their massive powers. They can't just do whatever they want. Their actions must be reasonable, fair, and legally sound at all times.
Now, to systematically track all of this performance without having to wait for a lawsuit every time, Parliament uses a specialized watchdog, the Committee on Public Undertakings. This represents that third pillar of democratic control we discussed a minute ago. It's a dedicated parliamentary committee designed specifically to examine the accounts and the overall performance of these massive public entities.
Now, while they vigorously investigate financial irregularities, review audit reports, and ensure economic accountability, there is a very crucial limitation to their power. They deliberately avoid interfering in daily operations or major government policy. Why? Well, because if they micromanaged every single decision, the corporation would lose the exact administrative flexibility and efficiency it was created to provide in the first place. It's a really delicate balancing act.
And there you have it, the architecture of the modern corporate giant. It's an artificial person granted immense power for public and private good, but heavily leashed by the Constitution and our legal systems. But as these corporations take on more and more critical public welfare functions in our modern world, I want to leave you with this to ponder. Are our current democratic controls truly enough to keep these artificial giants in check? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.